So this is our fourth and final video lecture for day one of our online qualitative methodology residential school. This one is all about how to conduct your interview. Yeah, we made it. Well, I made it. I had to do these videos back to back just to get them out to you in time because we're having to change plans at last minute with our residential. So sorry if I'm not making much sense in these later videos. It's been at this for about an hour and a bit, which might not seem much, but as I go on and on and on, my little house is very hot. It's still very hot in here. Okay, let's crack on. So you've designed your interview guide, you've got your questions, you've prepared your questions for the interview, you've prepared your interview setting. Now you need to run your interview. So, what are the key things to think about during the interview that will help it go well? Start off with something warm and welcoming and positive. A bit of small talk at the start, and it is okay to prepare this in advance. And it'd be good to see this in assessment 1 in your interview guide. I'd like you to put that in the interview guide. You know, just topics you can start off talking about. That little bit of small talk. It can provide the means for your participant to segue themselves into your interview topic, or it can just relax them. Now, I once ran an interview which was on research topic of disability and employment. I greeted the participant and we just started talking about the weather. They then talked about how they're looking forward to their holidays. And then they told me that this year's holiday was particularly important because it was the first one that they'd had for 10 years. And then they said, it's the first one I've had for 10 years because I've been out of work for 10 years and I've only recently got a job. And for 10 years, employers wouldn't look at me because I was disabled. And that was their way into the research topic. And it was a cracking interview. Probably great interview because we got to the topic their way. So sometimes the small talk works as a way for the participant to address your research question in their own way. But if that doesn't happen, then it's up to you to segue into your research question. For assessment 1, the interviews are quite short, so keep the small talk short, or else you may have 30 minutes of small talk and nothing to edit into your submission for your assessment 1. Now, when you segue into your research question, give a brief overview of the research, particularly why it's important, and you could talk about why it's important to you personally. Then thank them and reiterate the importance of their contribution. Offer a brief overview of what you'll be talking about in the interview, and then go through your ethics and informed consent. Now, you don't need to do that consent stuff for assessment 1. You don't need that detail in your interview guide. But in the real world, you'd need to go through your ethics and consent bit. Now, keep all of that preliminary stuff quite short because you don't want to be talking for too long as it sets up the wrong dynamic. You're really there to listen to the interviewee rather than have the interviewee listening to you. Then there's the closing bit of the interview. We'll get to the middle bit in a minute because that's important. But let's think about the closing of the interview. Once the time is up or you feel you've got everything you need, thank your participant and let them know something specific that they have contributed to your knowledge. People are often very keen to know that they have actually helped you. So let them know that they have helped you. And again, be warm and friendly and engage in a little bit of small talk. You could say, for example, oh, that went okay, didn't it? Now, don't stop recording at this point because you'll be surprised what happens at the end of an interview. People kind of relax and they can start talking a bit more freely and disclosing some thoughts that they hadn't previously disclosed to you. So watch out for that. Don't stop recording too soon. Keep the tape rolling right to the end because some surprises often happen at the end. Okay, so what to do during the interview? An interview is essentially about listening and responding, and we can't generate the kind of data that we need, and we're likely make it a crappy experience for the participant if we don't do these two things consistently well. The type of listening that we're talking about is a deep listening. You know, we suspend our internal distractions because we want to be able to really hear that person, really hear what they're saying. Responding is related to listening. Part of listening well is letting people know that you have heard and understood what they're saying so that they feel heard and valued. So listening is not easy. There are lots of things that detract us from listening. We end up listening inadequately when we have an internal dialogue going on in our heads. This is often happening when we feel under pressure to perform well, or are anxious, or we're rehearsing what we're about to say next. But when you're doing that, you're not listening to the person. You can also listen in a way that is too evaluative. You're making judgments about what someone is saying, or you are getting hooked up on a particular thing that they've said, or you're thinking about why what they're saying is wrong. You're jumping in too quickly and too fully into your analysis before you've fully heard what the person is saying. Then there's filtered listening, which is where you're filtering what someone says through your own value system and your own life experiences. You're not trying to walk in their shoes. You are just walking in your own shoes whilst listening to them. Now, this is really hard not to do, and we all inevitably do it. So this is why it's important to keep track of it and fully consider the ways your subjectivity is impacting on your understanding of what interviews are saying. And then there's rehearsing. As I said, often we do this when we're anxious about our performance, but sometimes we just do it even when we're not anxious. We'd start thinking about our next question, or the thing we're next about to say, or you have a smart remark or something that's in your head and you don't want to lose it. When you're holding on to those thoughts, again, you've stopped listening. Finally, there's interrupting. That's when you're not prepared to let go of those internal thoughts, those internal little monologues, by listening to the interviewee. Instead, you just blurt out your ideas before the interviewee has finished their point. Now, how do you show you're listening? As sometimes we're listening, but the interviewee is not aware of this. This is when we're not thinking about our non-verbal or paralinguistic communication. These are all those little micro skills of showing you attending to what someone is saying. The list here might seem funny, and these postural suggestions are not a replacement for actually listening, but it's all a vital part of building a rapport of people. And many of us have unconscious habits when other people are talking, which they interpret or might interpret as us not listening. Although we may well be listening, but generally people are pretty good at reading us. They can tell when we're not listening, and they can tell when we are listening. So these first two we have spoken about in another video. They're a bit different in an online environment, but you still need to think about them. For online, don't look away from the screen or from the webcam. If you start looking away, your interviewee will not only think you're not listening, but they will wonder what the heck it is that you've been distracted by. They can't see what's on the other side of your screen or what's on the side to the sides of your screen, but they'll start wondering what's there. You might just be looking at your second screen on your computer, but that will not be obvious to your participant, to your interviewee. They'll think that you're distracted, you're not interested in them, you've got something more interesting to be doing. So eyes front. Keep your eyes front. Keep your eyes front. And with those little micro-verbal communications, that all that stuff, don't rely on them for online, as they can be more distracting. And on some systems, as I've said before, they can actually mute your interviewee's mic. And if you're not careful about how you set up your video conferencing software, you'll end up having the camera switching over to you when you just go, and all the attention's taken away from your interviewee. And it can feel quite abrupt for your interviewee when that happens on screen. I'll tell you in the day 2 residential school videos how to set up Zoom to stop that happening. Now, the rest of this still applies. Don't lean back, but lean a bit forward. Keep your body language open. Don't kind of fidget too much, all of this, But all of these behavioral norms, they are norms, they're cultural norms. They are different in different cultures. So just be mindful of different behavioral norms operating in different cultures. So eye contact, for example, in some cultures there are very different rules, social rules attached to eye contact than the ones that we have here in Australia. I won't go into that. That's a whole long subject, and I want to keep this video quite short. So let's finish this one soon. So all of this listening helps us to respond to the person in front of us, show them that they are valued, but also helps us to generate the rich, detailed data we need for our research. But for you, it's not all about listening, because you do have to ask questions as well. You need to respond to what the participant is saying. Let's think about those responses. And I've got a list of 5 things here. Number 1, the first type of response involves staying with the question that you've asked. The biggest challenge for new interviewers is moving too quickly through your interview questions. Not only is this uncomfortable for the interviewee, it also leaves you without the depth of data that you need for your analysis. I see this happening again and again and again with students, particularly students on this unit, but every student on every unit I've ever taught on qualitative methods, you always get students who race through their interview really quickly. They finish their interview in about 5 or 10 minutes. That's not a good sign. That's a really bad sign. It shows you didn't really do much digging. You didn't probe into the answers your participant was giving you, and you weren't really generating a conversation. An hour-long interview only really needs about 3 or 4 questions. But if you're a bad interviewer, and you rush through your interview questions, you can rush through 4 questions in 5 minutes. You're not going to get anything. You're going to get really basic data. You're not going to get deep data that way. Now, sometimes participants' answers are short to begin with, and that's because they're unsure of what you're looking for. Remember, most people who participate in interviews are really keen to do a good job. They want to help you, but they don't always know what that might be. They don't know if they are actually going to be helpful, or if they're going to have an experience or a thought that you're going to find interesting or is going to be interesting for your project. So it's helpful to guide people by reassuring them that what they're telling you is valuable. So then they have a clearer idea that you'd like them to carry on talking about what they're just now talking about, and they'll go on talking. They'll feel more confident about speaking for longer and going into more depth. Now, many participants are worried that they're wasting our time. We worry about wasting their time, they worry about wasting our time. So don't forget that. Always give encouragement to your participant. There's a dog barking outside. That's nice. And don't forget to tailor your responses and questions to what the person has said. If they've said they're single, don't ask them about their partner. You need to adapt your responses and your questions and tailor them to what your participant is talking about. Don't just have generic responses, and don't stick strictly to the questions you've written out on your interview guide. Your responses and questions are key to showing that you're listening, and you need to adapt to what your interviewee is saying. Number 4, empathy. Our prescribed text talks about the difference between interest and empathy. I'm a bit uncomfortable with how they've defined empathetic interviewing. I think it's a little too narrow. They define an emphatic response as one where we might agree with the person or disclose some personal information about ourselves. For example, yes, that's my experience too, or yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I think that's a good idea to establish rapport and trust. We tend not to like telling someone what we think if they're not prepared to tell us what they think. But I think an emphatic response is one where we show the person we've heard not just their words, but their emotions, and that they that we've really heard them. We're really listening to them. I think that's what it means to be emphatic in our questioning. Finally, number 5, remember that you are responding as a researcher, not as you. And I think this is what the textbook authors are getting to when they're talking about emphatic responses. Responding as an interviewer in a professional conversation is particularly challenging when you're talking about things that you and the interviewee may have quite different opinions about. Your job is not to inform people, to argue with people, or to point out where someone's wrong. Sure, you can tell your participant what you think, but you mustn't come across as an expert on the topic or as having a closed mind on the topic. It's good to go in with a bit of naivety to show that you're willing to learn from your participant, that you are open-minded, and that you are listening. Okay, we are just about finished, and I can turn the air conditioning back on. What I'd like you to do between now and week 6 is practice recording yourself or someone else via Zoom, and make sure you get your microphone working well. Get familiar with the software. I'll give you a bit of help with that, some pointers to that in day 2 video, pre-recorded video. But it's critical you get that stuff right. If I can't hear what you're saying in your interview when I'm assessing the edited version of that interview that you send me, we're going to talk about that in the day 2, videos for day 2. If I can't hear you, you're not going to pick up any marks. I'm not going to be able to fill in the gaps that I can't hear. So make sure the audio is good. Also, be gentle on my ears. Don't record too loud or too soft. I'll talk to you about that in the video editing, in day 2. For now, just want to flag that you want your audio to sit somewhere between -18 and -12 decibels. What the heck is that? What does that mean? Don't worry. Most video editing software has a sound level meter with decibels marked on it. Just follow that rule. That's where your sound needs to be. Make sure that levels don't drop too low or go up too high. I'll talk to you about that day 2 video. Basically, if your levels on your audio go up into the red, it's too loud. If they go to the dark green, too quiet. Okay, went all techie again there. Sorry about that, but it's useful stuff to know, and I'll talk you through it in the next series of videos for day 2. So, the interviews in week 6 or 7. By the end of our residential school, you should have your interview partner lined up and should have an idea of when your online interview will take place. And you'll record that interview, edit it down to 5 minutes, and submit it as part of Assessment 1. And the deadline for submission is in the review exam week. That's the week after Teaching Week 12. There's a schedule up on Moodle that shows you all the available slots for those interviews during Teaching Week 6 and 7. And we'll talk more about that in Assessment 1 and all that's involved in our next series of videos for day 2 of our residential. I need to bring this to a close, don't I? But just before I do, just to tell you the topic of that interview, what you're going to be interviewing on. The interview is going to be on the social environmental factors that negatively impact university students' mental health, and our research question is, what do students studying a level 3 undergraduate unit in psychology understand to be the social environmental factors that negatively impact university students' mental health? In day 2 of our residential, you'll be working with other students to develop your interview questions from that research question. And finally, just an explanation of the research question, because there is an ethical issue behind all of this which is leading us to ask that particular question. We're asking an understanding and perceptions type question. The reason for this is to limit any ethical risks any of us have of disclosing personal details about our own mental health status. If we asked an experience question, we would get into ethical issues very quickly, as people might feel that they have to disclose personal information that they would rather not or wouldn't otherwise do. Of course, you're free to talk about your experiences in the interview if you're the interviewee, but be aware that would not necessarily help the interviewer answer the research question, and you just need to be aware that you're being recorded. So, yeah, stay safe. You know what I mean, don't you? Don't over-disclose unless you want to. Don't reveal things about yourself unless you want other people to know those things. And remember, I might get to know those things too, because I'll be listening to the recording. Okay, so that's enough for day 1. We made it. And yeah, I'm off now to start recording the videos for day 2 of our residential. I'll try and make them a little smaller. Okay, so, till then, see you soon. Ta-da.